Hi, my name is Bree Newsome, and you are tuned into UNC Charlotte's Black Perspectives, hosted by the Black Student Union.
So, what was your reason behind removing the flag?
Well, I think what's important to understand about this particular flag in Columbia, South Carolina, this flag was raised in 1962. So you're talking about like as the second civil rights movement, or as the civil rights movement of the 60s was really starting to get underway. When we took the flag down, a lot of people were making comments like, oh, that flag should have come down, 150 years ago. But I think what's really important to understand is that this flag was raised in the 60s. So this flag was really about anti-civil rights. It was like a statement to the federal government, who at that time was starting to really press on the South to integrate schools. This came right after the Friendship 9, which was a group of students from Rock Hill, South Carolina, who did a sit-in that got a lot of attention. And so our decision to take down this flag, I mean, people had been boycotting this flag for not boycotting, there had been a lot of controversy around this flag from the time that it was raised for the reasons that I outlined. You had like a boycott going on for like 15 plus years. It was never just accepted that this flag was flying there, and I think that's important to understand, that what happened was we had this massacre that kind of reignited an issue that had long been there. Like, I had conversations with activists months ago about the possibility of doing an action where we took down the Confederate flag. And so when the massacre happened, which struck me on a number of different levels. Personally, it really affected me as somebody who has been in this movement for a while. Like I said, I got involved back in 2013 in the wake of the Trayvon Martin case, like a lot of young black people at that time. And just kind of seeing how the movement progressed over time, we started out doing a lot of actions that were kind of commemorative of the past, sit-ins, things like that. I did a sit-in at the North Carolina State Capitol around the issue of voting rights. But when the massacre happened, and this was coming after like a series of high-profile case after high-profile case of a young black person getting gunned down by the police. We had the situation in Ferguson that we had seen. And so by the time that the massacre had happened, it just kind of drove home that we are still dealing with like a level of backlash and violence that I had kind of felt was, maybe in the past. But the Charleston massacre reminded me a lot of the 16th Street Baptist church bombing, which was a church bombing in 1963 that killed 4 little girls. And so when the massacre happened, and especially when it was very clear that the flag was going to be allowed to continue to fly, even as the victims were still being laid to rest, like the Confederate flag was at full staff, the United States flag was at half staff, and the state flag was at half staff. That was kind of like when it really kind of cemented for us, like we felt that it was really important to make this statement right now, that this is no longer acceptable, that this is the 21st century, that we can no longer tolerate this kind of level of just disregard and disrespect for black life.
Okay. So why do you feel that people are just now jumping on the bandwagon for the removal of the Confederate flag?
Yeah, so again, I would kind of push back. Does this work? Okay, yeah, sorry. I would kind of push back on that idea. It's not that people are just jumping on the bandwagon now to take down the Confederate flag. And in fact, I did a panel at Wake Forest that was really interesting, because one of the panel members included a politician from South Carolina, and he made this remark, well, why did black people protest in 1962 when the flag was raised? Okay, well, let's look at a little historical context. I mean, in 1962, you're talking about, we still had like an all-white legislature that is making the decision that this Confederate flag is going to fly over the State House at a time when black people still didn't have like a secure right to vote, which we still don't have, which we still don't have today, really. And so it's not really that people just jumped on the bandwagon. I think it was that we have had a year or two, really, of maybe more than that, of like kind of building racial tension, I would say, like in this country. And I think that what the massacre did was that it really kind of was a tipping point on this flag that has been an issue for a long time. For instance, in 2000, as part of a compromise over, the controversy over this flag, they moved it from flying over the dome of the Capitol to being in the yard. People have attempted in the past to climb up and take the flag down. Back in like 2000 or 2001, someone climbed up and burned the flag. And that's when they built the fence up around it that we had to jump over in order to climb. So it's not that it has really become big. I think it's just that the massacre on top of everything else that has been going on really kind of was this tipping point where everybody was like, okay, enough is enough. It's time to take this down.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think it is that causes such an outrage over the Confederate flag?
Because I think for those who are historically aware, the Confederate flag really is a symbol of slavery first. When it was first designed to represent the Confederacy as they were seceding from the Union in the fight over maintaining slavery as an institution in the South, and into the territories that the United States was, expanding into at that point in time. One, two, after the Civil War ended, the Confederate flag became a symbol for that cause, for the ongoing lost cause, as they might refer to it. The KKK was formed in 1865 of former Confederate soldiers, and they would use the Confederate flag as part of their emblem as they would go around terrorizing free black people to keep them from voting, to keep them from becoming economically and politically empowered throughout the South. A chapter of American history that is often forgotten, doesn't get a lot of attention but is very important, is Reconstruction. The Reconstruction era from about 1867 to 1877, which failed. And that was the time at which we were supposed to be, as a country, addressing the economic devastation and everything else that was caused as a result of slavery for African Americans. We were supposed to be addressing the issue of free blacks. What happened instead was that it failed and we had another 100 years of Jim Crow laws. And you will see, like all throughout history, you'll see images of people where they were protesting for civil rights throughout the South, and you would see opponents of civil rights standing on the sidelines waving the Confederate flag. That's what it represents. And when it was raised over the State House in South Carolina or Mississippi or Alabama or any of these other places, it was understood that that's what it means. There was an activist named Heather Doyle, just really great activist from New York. She was with Greenpeace. They are an environmentalist activist group, so they do a lot of stuff like climbing trees, hanging in trees for days, a lot of like climbing gear and things like that. And she came down and trained me on how to climb the poles. So we were like sneaking into like parks after dark, climbing lampposts. I was like practicing on a basketball hoop at one point. And so,
Ball is life.
What's that?
Ball is life.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I commit, like I said, it was like a Tuesday. We had a meeting in the House where we said this is, how we could pull this action off. These are the different roles that would be involved. Obviously, one of the roles was to climb to the top. I volunteered. From that point forward, like I said, I only had about 4 days. So I was just really focused on how to climb and not die from climbing. And then just really focused on like kind of mentally preparing myself. I really didn't think about the aftermath part. I didn't think about the aftermath if I survived the action. I was really kind of more focused on preparing myself mentally for what physical danger I might face, not just from climbing, but, from the police. At one point when I was on the pole, the police threatened to tase me. And just from the possibility of a passerby coming by. We also had to think about the possible retaliation for doing an action like that. we're targeting this symbol of white supremacy. And so that was kind of like where my mind was at. It was after the fact that it happened, and it was like trending on Twitter and all this other stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, now I gotta kind of adjust for that. But mostly my mind was on just focusing on that task. Yeah.
So like when you got arrested, you finally like saw your influence of what you did all over Twitter. That's what motivated you to like start doing like way more, like more broadcasting, a lot more getting the news out to other people.
Somewhat. I mean, anybody who's like followed me on Twitter for a while, I've been tweeting the same stuff. Like I would be on Twitter going in on all these issues just because I cared. I remember like when Trayvon Martin happened, and I recognized that had it not been for social media, had it not been for people tweeting these stories out, like, trying to draw attention, trying to make certain things trend, we would have never known about it. We would have never known about Trayvon Martin or Ferguson, probably Freddie Gray, probably a lot of these cases, So nothing really changed like in terms of my Twitter or anything like that. What happened was, I got arrested. I went into the jail. In jail, we didn't know what the reaction was. We knew that the flag had gone back up within like 45 minutes. And so I was like, well, maybe it made a statement, maybe it didn't. I don't know. It was only when we were in there and like we got word that like Dwayne Wade was willing to like pay our bail or something like that. I was like, okay, I guess the word got out. Okay. So.
And of course, with everything that everybody does, there are haters, right? So how do you respond to the backlash?
I mean, I expect that, we're getting the really light end of it. I mean, so what's really important to understand is that, first of all, I didn't do this for any media attention, anything like that. Like, that's not why I did this. I am a freedom fighter. I'm in this movement. I did that with the same, I had to really honestly go into this action being prepared that I might not come out from it. Now, it's because we're here at this end, and here I am having this lovely conversation with y'all people. It's a much more pleasant situation that I'm in right now. But at the time, I just really didn't know like what the possible consequences of the action would be. And so whatever backlash I was expecting or I was prepared for was just the backlash that comes with pushing for social justice. I thought about like in kind of like the lead up to it, I was reflecting on things like the freedom fighters. I have a lot of admiration for folks like John Lewis, those people who, if you're not familiar with the Freedom Riders, this was a group of young people, mostly students, who, and against the wishes of folks like Martin Luther King and some of like the more establishment leaders of the time, decided to board buses and force the issue of segregated buses on interstate travel. And so they would get into the buses, a mixed race group of people, and go down into the South. And sometimes they would meet the Klan and the police, who were one and the same at that time in the South, still are in a lot of places. And so, yeah, so the backlash to me is not about, people tweeting something like, oh, I disagree with you. Backlash to me is what we get from the state. Backlash is when the police arrest me and threaten me with like 3 years in jail, which I'm facing possibly, and a $5,000 fine for removing a flag. Because we're challenging the power structure. So I'm just trying to say, like, what people comments ain't nothing to me. Like, we're dealing with a power structure. Yeah.
How has the incident changed you or impacted your life?
I've honestly been really humbled by it. In some ways, I kind of feel like I underestimated the reaction from the public. I think on so many levels, it was deeply personal for me when I was doing that, because I myself was terrified. I mean, the night that the massacre happened, I was up at like 2 o'clock in the morning. I had to call my sister. Because, I mean, what you have to understand, I think, about kind of like where I'm coming from is like, I'm looking at Reverend Pinckney being assassinated. He's a civil rights leader in his community in Charleston. It's not far from here. He's not doing anything drastically different from what we're doing in our community. They're having meetings at Mother Emanuel, AME Church. They're pushing for police reform. You have to understand that the Charleston massacre, remember, this came within the context of the Walter Scott case, who was a black man in Charleston who had been, was caught on video by a passerby being shot in the back, murdered by a police officer. And Charles Pinckney had just successfully gotten some body cam legislation passed where they were going to have all the officers required to wear body cams. Mother Emanuel was targeted because of its role, its long role in organization in the black community. So as somebody in Charlotte, where we're doing the same things, we're having our meetings over at like Little Rock AME Church, to see this happen was it affected me very personally. And so on a deep level for me, I felt like when that opportunity came up where I could participate in this action, that I wanted to make that statement that I would not allow fear and racism and hatred and this same terror that we have been living under for so long as black people in the South and in America, that when I had this opportunity that I would not allow fear to get the best of me. And so for me, it was so deeply personal that when it was over and I have been, traveling around and having conversations with people and seeing how much it impacted other people was really was humbling for me. To see the images that people were creating that were inspired by the moment was just so powerful. And so while I don't feel as much dramatic change in my own life, it's just been really amazing the reactions, some of the interactions that I have been having with people, especially young black women and young black girls who really responded to seeing a black woman make that kind of statement.
Okay, so moving forward, what advice do you have for the next generation?
I think the main thing that I would say is that, and I was actually just at A&T and somebody asked me a similar question, is just to recognize that, so by next generation you mean like y'all? Okay, I just want to make sure because, yeah, I think the thing is to recognize that you really are the leaders of today. If you go back and you look at the civil rights movement, they were all your age. Like SNCC was founded was college students. A lot of like I mentioned the Freedom Riders earlier, these were college students. Freedom Summer was spearheaded by college students. And these were not older people telling them, oh, this is what you should go do. And a lot of times they were acting against the wishes of older generation folks. So I think a lot of time we get this kind of messaging like you're the leaders of tomorrow, you're the leaders of the future. I would say no, you really are the leaders of today. And I think that's really important to recognize. A lot of the issues that are going on right now with student debt crisis, even the issues that we're dealing with around racial and economic justice are most impacting young people. It's like 18 to 30-year-olds. And so just recognizing that you don't have to wait your turn, like your turn really is right now. Like your generation now. I would say more so than Generation Next.
Okay, so thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Oh, Chipotle, yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And can I just say one more thing? I really want to, like, don't just take anything I said because now I've been, propelled to some national spotlight and society says that now I deserve to have a microphone and sit in front of people and tell them, whatever I think. Seek knowledge, like research. My opinions are completely based on me studying history, foreign policy, facts, reality, and I would just encourage you to really do the same. Like really study history. There's the story. There's kind of like the narrative that we are kind of taught of how things are as they are. And then there's history, which is never really as clear or as straightforward as the narrative that we're often given. And so to really understand like the present moment, the present is never really a mystery to people who study the past. And the important thing about studying the past is that when you understand that the present is a consequence of the past, you understand that your future is a consequence of the present, and it will empower, like knowledge will empower you in that way because you recognize that we are shaping the future right now. So when they say, well, I mean, it's as corny and cliche as it sounds, and I'm going to wrap it up, I promise. But if you leave, I promise, like if you leave with nothing else that I said today, like knowledge is power, like it really, really is, and like it's important to recognize how powerful you are as students as well, and that students have always historically been under attack, especially under oppressive powers, because you have access to knowledge and you're young, and knowledge is such an empowering thing, especially when you are young and you have so much life and opportunity ahead of you. So just please, like, study, never stop, never lose a thirst for knowledge and for wisdom. I hope you keep studying. So thank you.